wormholes, particle physics, extra dimensions. Are the wonders of so-called reality really what they appear to be? Or do we exist in an elaborate hologram? Is our universe the result of random activity or the result of intelligent design? If a creator was involved, can we discover him through our perception of divine order? This is Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck.
Hey, I've got a fever, and the only prescription is more multiverse. Welcome to Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck. I am your host, Josh Peck, and joining the studio with me, my wonderful and beautiful wife, Christina Peck. Christina, how are you doing?
Doing wonderful. Good to be back here. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that we're doing this too. I am so excited about today's show because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. The fourth dimensions. That's right, more than one fourth dimensions. And I guess we can just really jump right into it. But first, we should probably tell people where they can find the show and, all that stuff. Do you want to tell them the YouTube channel?
Sure. You can find our program on skywatchtv.com or on YouTube at youtube.com/skywatchtv_official.
Fantastic. And we're also on Roku. So that's where you can find all these episodes. And if you haven't done so already, check out the first episode that we did, our pilot episode. It's called What is the Multiverse? We talked about that last week. So this week, we're talking about the fourth dimensions. There is actually more than one fourth dimensions, believe it or not. So I guess we could start off by explaining what a dimension actually is. Mm-hmm. When we talk about dimensions of existence, we exist in three spatial dimensions, or three dimensions of space. Now, if we remember back to our high school geometry classes, we remember working on those graph papers. We have the x-axis, which is side to side, y-axis, which, well, I guess if it's flat on a table, it would be front and back. Mm-hmm. And then the z-axis, which is up and down. So those are the three spatial dimensions, or dimensions of space, that we exist in. And the cool thing about us living in three dimensions is that God's actually given us a handy tool to remember this.
Yes.
On our very own bodies, our hands. You can actually illustrate the three dimensions that we live in like this. We have the x-axis going this way, we have the y-axis going this way, and z-axis going up and down. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a handy tool to help.
It's interesting. Yes. Yep, yeah. That's very awesome. And so I guess we should probably explain a little bit more about time and space. Yeah,
why there are two fourth dimensions. And it's kind of funny because on the Facebook page this morning, somebody had a question about that. How can there be two fourths? Also, if you're interested, go to Facebook and check out Into the Multiverse. It's a Facebook page. You can search for it, and it'll pop right up. Make sure to like and share with your friends. But somebody had a question, and we always encourage, people can leave comments. And
absolutely.
We love to hear from people.
Absolutely.
But somebody had a question. How could there be two fourths? Wouldn't one be the fourth and one be the fifth?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And that when I was first researching for this kind of stuff, that was a question I had too. And what I learned was it really depends on who's talking. It's a personal preference. Mm-hmm. Some physicists will say that time is the fourth dimension. And that's absolutely correct. Yep. Some physicists will say the fourth dimension is actually the higher dimension of space above the third. And that's absolutely correct. It all depends on the context and what they're talking about. And not always will a physicist take time to explain what they're talking about first.
Or they'll just put it together and say it's space-time.
Yeah, that's another way that's another way that
and
they'll...
And it's also correct.
Yep, they'll say that we exist in four dimensions of space-time, which is a perfectly acceptable way to say it. So it really all depends on context and what the physicist or scientist in question is talking about at the time. So there's no real concrete definition.
Right.
It actually, this sort of problem, or whatever you want to call it, with the fourth dimensions, started with Einstein, because back then they were talking about a hypothetical fourth dimension of space, so not time at all. But then Einstein came along and he did his fantastic research. When he put forth his discoveries about time and gravity, he started to say that time was truly the fourth dimension that everybody was searching for. And yeah, he was right. But there are still extra dimensions of space.
Yeah, and what we're doing is we're breaking it down. We're talking about the time and the space, and that is why it can be considered two parts of the same dimension.
And biblically speaking, we see both time and space.
Yes.
So again, even with the Bible, it just depends on the context that's being used. But at least with the Bible will actually say time or duration, or God has signified that for us, which is great for me, because if God doesn't keep it simple for me, we're all in big trouble.
Right. Well, we can find this passage in the Bible in Ephesians, Ephesians 3. Verses 17 and 18, that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and length and depth and height. Right there we have 4 dimensions.
Yeah, and I love this passage because it's so unassuming at first. I mean, I must have read that 100 times in my life, and it wasn't until I heard Chuck Missler actually did. He had a piece of a presentation where he talked a little bit about this, and it was phenomenal. But when you go into, I like Blue Letter Bible when I do this kind of study. But with Blue Letter Bible, you can look at the Strong's Concordance for all these. And in looking at these, and I'm going to bring it up here, the first 3 dimensions are just exactly what they say. There's nothing real mysterious, or there's nothing really hidden in the Greek there. It's X, Y, and Z axis. But when we get to height, it comes from the Greek word hupsos, but it has an interesting spelling because it's HYPSOS is the transliteration.
And I brought up a little earlier before the show that looks like it could be where we get hypersphere or hypercube from.
Yep.
It looks like it just seems like that could be where we get our word from, for our dimensions.
And that blew my mind when you said that, because I totally missed it. And I thought that was a really good catch. Because when we're talking about extra spatial dimensions, higher than the 3 of space that we live in, physicists will put the prefix hyper on it. So if we talk about a cube with extra dimensions, then it's a hypercube, or a sphere with extra dimensions, it's a hypersphere, so on and so forth. When you showed me that those first 3 letters are HYP, wow. And this is why that's so interesting, because the definition here, it says height, and then it gives 3 examples. A, of measurement, so that's cut and dry. But the second one, B, it says of place, comma, heaven. So what's great about Blue Letter Bible is you can actually look at different passages that same word is used in. And it gives a list of 6 verses in the New Testament, and I can just go through a couple of these to show that how often this is actually used for what I believe is an extra dimension of space or heaven. It says, Luke 1:78 says, through the tender mercy of our God, whereby the dayspring from on high hath visited us, and that word high is that same hupsos. It's pronounced hupsos in the Greek, but the way that it's transliterated and spelled, it has the HYP. So that's talking about heaven.
Heaven.
And there's another one here. I won't read all of these, but Luke 24:49, and behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry ye in the city of Jerusalem until ye be endued with power from on high. So again, it's talking about heaven, from God, from heaven.
That same Greek word.
Yeah, and so I believe that a case could be made that this fourth dimension in Ephesians here is actually talking about an extra dimension of space or heaven. Now, the really interesting one, the one that I didn't catch until today, Revelation 21:16. It says, "And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth, and he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal." So again, it uses that word height. And there's a lot of discussion as to what the shape of the New Jerusalem is going to be.
Yeah, it could be a hypercube.
It could be. It's usually torn between two camps. Some believe that it's a perfect cube, and some believe that it might be like a pyramid, like a tetrahedron.
Right, and it has 12 gates to it too. If you want to go on further in Revelation, in the same chapter, when he's describing the city and the walls and everything, it has the 12 gates. So equal gates on each side. You know, it would be. How would that be for a hypercube?
It would be three on each.
Three on each side.
But if it's a hypercube, which that might be what that word height is giving us a hint to, and it would make sense because this would be an extra dimensional creation anyway.
Right.
If it is a hypercube, then that's pretty astounding there, and so we might all have it wrong as to what shape this thing could be. But yeah, and now, this might be a bit of a reach, but I thought that this was kind of interesting. All throughout the book of Revelation, really all throughout the Bible, we see the number 12 that's being used for divine government and
perfect order.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is this word, hupsos, for this extra dimension, it's actually, it occurs 6 times in 6 verses in the Greek concordance of the KJV, but it has a double meaning. So it's like 12, 6 and 6.
It is a reach, but hey, it's an interesting fact that you brought up.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. It's interesting. Might not mean anything, but it is at least interesting.
It was a good thought.
Yeah. Before we get too much further into this, I want to take a quick break because Skywatch TV has some really interesting stuff that you should all be aware of. So we will be right back.
From the time she was little, Nita dreamed of horses. Every childhood fantasy rode on the back of a heroic white steed, coming to save the day.
I don't know how long I've had this love in my heart for horses. It's just always been there. And when we were little girls, my sister and I would play all day long. I was always the white horse and she was always the little pink pig.
Let's pretend Lightning and Rosie can fly.
But everything changed in a heartbeat. On December 9th, 1971, a tragic car accident claimed the life of my dad and my best friend and my little sister. And I wondered after that if there was anything left to believe in.
Move aside, let the ambulance through. Please move aside.
As a child of 13, I felt like I had lost practically everything. And I wondered, is this it? I mean, where do I go from here? I could not have imagined back then how God could use horses, of all things, to restore my faith and vision for the future.
Starting April 19th, Get your copy of Nita Horn's inspirational new book, No Fences, and learn for the first time her amazing story of loss, survival, determination, and healing. How the vision and love God gave her for these beautiful and majestic animals eventually led to the 150-acre Whispering Ponies Ranch, a general retreat facility, as well as a premier training location that specializes in using and gifting therapeutic animals to benefit the hurting. Other care facilities, schools, and ministries across the nation.
When God puts something in your heart, it's there for a lifetime.
And we're back talking about the fourth dimensions. So we briefly went over the fourth dimension of space, and we will be getting more into that in next week's episode and really throughout this whole show, because there's just so much. It's impossible to cover in just half an hour.
Oh, yeah.
The whole idea of extra dimensions. But we touched briefly on the dimension of space. So next, we could talk about time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Time. The time is a property of our space,
Yeah.
and not just outer space.
Yeah, and that's something else, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something else that we should talk about right off the gate. When we talk about space, we're not just talking about outer space. That was something when I began to research these types of things for my books, Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots. I would read a lot of books by other physicists, and they would say in all points of space, or they talked about space a lot, and I always assumed they were talking about like outer space and the cosmos, but that's not necessarily what they're talking about.
Right here.
Exactly, right here in front of us. They are talking about outer space too, but it's just all areas of space, from right in front of your nose to billions of light years into the universe. That's their words. That's what they're talking about. So when we talk about a dimension of space, we don't just mean outer space.
No, we mean the dimensions in front of us, like what we are made of. We're made up of 3 dimensions. Speaking of which, us, our personal bodies, we can even almost say we have a 4th dimensional property to us as being our soul.
Right.
Because our soul is eternal.
It's extra dimensional. Right.
Regardless of what you believe, you're going somewhere when you die.
Right.
Your soul is going somewhere. It lives on forever.
Right. And where that'll be will depend on your relationship with Jesus Christ, if you have one or not. But going back to time, and this goes even further to answer the question, isn't time the 4th dimension? Yes and no. It depends. Time. We experience it, and it is a dimension, but more accurately, it might. Physicists are now starting to talk that as it's a property of spatial dimensions, and that makes sense if we think about it. When we have the first dimension, if we're only considering one dimension, the x-axis, time runs the same for that as it does for the y-axis, if we're just talking about flatland, which we're going to get a little more into in next week's episode. But if we're just talking about flatland, time would run the same for them, and it runs the same for us. So time is more of a property of space,
right?
Which next episode we'll get more into that.
Get deeper into it.
Now, what's really interesting is that there are some Bible verses that talk about God's relationship with time, and therefore His relationship with us too.
Yes, absolutely. He both resides inside and outside of time.
Yeah.
That's how He can be in all places at once, because He resides outside of our time. And it's almost like being the author of a book. You write this book. You can write yourself into the book, and you can take yourself out. Or you can flip through the pages and land wherever you want at any given time. And that's how you can almost comprehend the awesomeness of God being wherever he wants to be at any given time at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, he's in a sense in two places at once, outside of time and inside time. And actually, we have an illustration of this in Genesis 19:24, which says, "Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." So right there, Lord in heaven, outside of time, and the Lord out of heaven, outside of time.
Yeah, inside of time.
And also, Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure. End from the beginning.
And from the beginning.
So again, his relationship with time is different than ours. He's outside of time. Now we should talk about what the fourth dimension of space is.
Mm-hmm. Each higher dimension has two new perpendicular directions, impossible to visualize past the third.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. If we think of it as, again, from geometry class, we start off with a point, and when we graph that, it's, 0, 0. So we start off at a point. Now, when we go into the first dimension, which is the x-axis, you add two new directions, one on either end. So you get the line.
Yes.
Now, that's the first dimension. Now for a dimension higher than that,
Right.
two new perpendicular, and that's the rule, two new perpendicular lines. And for those who might not be in high school currently and haven't had to think about this stuff in years, like me, parallel is basically side by side, and then perpendicular is 90-degree turn from what you're originally starting with, so like that. So when we talk about two new perpendicular directions off of the x-axis, that gives us our y-axis.
Yep.
So now we have two dimensions that we're working with.
Right.
Now is the z-axis. That would be the third. Again, two new perpendicular directions. So we get up and down
Yep.
from the original point that we started with. That gives us our third dimension. Now, beyond that, where could you put two new directions
Exactly.
that are perpendicular?
Perpendicular lines, and that's when you're starting to get into your hypercubes and your hyper
That's
geometry type shapes.
That's when we talk about the fourth spatial dimension, which is impossible for us to visualize, because any line that we would branch off of the point, the 0 point, where all the three axes converge, even if it's a diagonal line, it's just the combination of the other three that we have.
Right.
So there's no way to really visualize what this fourth dimension could be. That speaks to our own limitations. And something that we'll get into next episode.
A lot more in the next episode.
Flatland.
We can talk about Flatland
Yep.
and talk about it so much more, and that will help us understand our higher dimensions if we can study the lower dimensions.
Exactly. And just a brief teaser of that. Imagine you are a flatlander. Imagine you are a being of two dimensions, X and Y. There is no up or down for you. Now, imagine all you see ahead of you is just flat planes or lines. Imagine if a third dimensional being were to breach your space and what that would look like to you, how amazing and phenomenal that would be for you. That's why an example like Flatland, which going back to Chuck Missler was the first time that I heard of Flatland, but come to find out, every physicist that talks about extra dimensions
know all
use
about
it.
it.
Yes, because it is such a good illustration for these things.
Absolutely, and it helps you understand so much more about our dimensions, and it helps us. We're able to perceive a little bit more about our higher dimensions.
Yes, and it helps us understand the spiritual creation, which, we tend to think of spiritual creation as kind of wispy or ethereal, not really made of anything. But as it turns out,
it's quite the opposite.
It is.
It's actually more real than our own dimension here. Just like going back to Flatland in the 2 dimensions, the 1 and 2 dimensions. Looking down, that looks wispy and unrealistic and wow, how could anybody exist in that kind of deal?
Yeah.
And then, the higher dimensions, the more you go, the more you understand. It's like, wow, this is more real. This is life. This is how it's supposed to be.
Exactly.
And completely comprehended.
Yep, like when a Flatlander, if there was a spiritual Flatlander, if he was a spiritual person, when he would think of what we live in, the 3rd dimension, he would probably think that it's, wispy or ethereal just because that's what their perception would tell them.
Right, exactly.
But really, we're more real, more solid,
The
more
higher
weightier.
you go.
The more real it gets.
Absolutely.
So we will be talking about that in next week's episode. Now, if you haven't had a chance to do so, you can pick up my books, Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, at skywatchtvstore.com. Right now, you can get both of them for $29.95, which is a $40 value. So make sure to take advantage of that. And it's about all this kind of stuff that we're talking about on this show. So if you want more information, that would be the place to go. Also, if you want to check out our YouTube channel, it is youtube.com/skywatchtv_official. And you can also check us out on Roku. And don't forget, there is a Into the Multiverse Facebook page. So make sure you check that out. Like us, leave a comment, tell us that you're watching. And lastly, if you have any questions or suggestions for shows, you can email me at jpeck@skywatchtv.com, and we'll be happy to take a look at your ideas and possibly bring them into a show.
Yeah, bring them into the show and explain a little bit and try to answer the best we can with our knowledge and with backing it up with the Bible.
Yes, always backing it up with the Bible. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute blast. Until next week, thank you for watching. Take care, and God bless.
To celebrate the release of Nita Horn's inspiring new book, No Fences, Skywatch TV would like you to tell your story, because after all, even if you don't think so, you actually have a story.
Send in your story, and we are going to choose the 10 best, and they'll be published for Christmas release in an anthology of those stories, along with the book that you buy that is actually only $19.95. Am I right on that?
That's correct.
For free. Tom Horn, crazy guy, he's throwing in a journal, which on its own, most of these retail for $20 on their own. So this journal is to help you start writing your story. When you buy the book, not only are you going to be enrolled in this and you can send in your story, but you'll get a plastic pony, you'll get a journal of your own, and the proceeds from the book are going to help fund the studio we're building for Skywatch Women, and Nita Horn is going to be one of our panel members.
The 10 authors who are selected for the anthology, published by Defender Publishing in time for Christmas, will also receive a $500 cash prize.
That'll go a long way at Christmas time, won't it?
Yes, it will. Even if your story is not one of those selected for the anthology, if you've taken the time to write your story, you've left a legacy for your children and for your grandchildren.
Amen to that.
For complete instructions and details on this opportunity, please log on to skywatchtv.com/nofences.